Hey everyone, welcome to Elder Gal Spirit. So today I'm going to talk about something that when I used to work for hospice was a really timely topic. It always came up at our staff meetings and the nurses would share stories about this, and I'm going to share a story with you today. It's not involving my experience, but someone who was on hospice service. But the reason I thought about it is I keep, as I get older and get, closer and closer to the end of my life, I think about this phenomenon and I think, gee, I hope that happens. It's one of those things that I actually am looking forward to in that whole transition from this world to another world, basically. And that is seeing your loved ones who have passed on before you die. Now, if you have any experience with this, please share in the comments below. I personally have not had this experience. The one time that I actually died in my life and was brought back was when I was still a baby, and I have no conscious memory of it. I don't know what I might have seen. I do know that the experience of dying, and I mean, I actually died. They had to resuscitate me. Has made me never afraid of death after that. So I know whatever I must have experienced must have been fine, must have been pleasant in some way, but I don't have any conscious memory of it, so I can't really share that experience. The other times in my life I've been closer to death. I was never really dead. I never lost consciousness. I was never resuscitated. So I don't have any other near-death experiences. And we're going to probably talk about more about near-death experiences later on anyway in another video. But today I wanted to talk about specifically the phenomenon of seeing your loved ones who have passed on before you die. This is a relatively common phenomenon, and I'm speaking about this from my experience working for a hospice for about 4.5 years and talking to a number of nurses who worked with patients who were dying. And I would say between 60 and 70% of the people they were caring for did see their dead relatives in some way before they died. Sometimes it was just a few hours before, sometimes it was for a week or so before, and it could have even been a little longer than that. And I'm going to share a story with you in a minute, which I always found probably the most interesting and compelling story about getting visitations from loved ones before you die. So I'm going to share that in a minute. But again, just generally, I don't know if that brings you comfort knowing that you might see your father or mother or grandparents or whoever has preceded you in death before you die. I know for me personally, it gives me great comfort to think that. It makes me feel like, my mother and my father and my grandparents, aunts, uncles, would be there to welcome me back to this, other reality. But some people, it kind of freaks out. It reminds me of that movie, The Sixth Sense, where, he sees dead people. Now, for him, the kid's not near death. He just has this gift that dead people realize he can see them and they're communicating with him. But, I didn't even find that movie really scary because to me, again, it's that, we know that when people move on to the next reality, next dimension, whatever you want to call it, they can have interactions with us. And I don't mean they're ghosts. I've talked a little bit about ghosts on this channel, and I've had other, I'll have other stories about actual ghosts, but this is not a ghost. This is just someone's spirit that's able to cross into our dimension, at least in some way, some even small way, so that we know that they're there. If you've watched any other videos on this channel, you know that I definitely was visited by my mother after she died. There's no question in my mind. Absolutely no question in my mind. She hung out with me for quite a while. For maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks, she was there a lot. Then it became less and less, and eventually she just wasn't visiting anymore, but she was visiting me. There's no question of that. And I would assume that whenever it's my time to go, my mother will come back and be there for me. So, but let me tell you this story about, this is a true, and I believe this story completely. It was told to me by one of our hospice nurses when I worked at a hospice. And she said it was the strangest thing that she ever witnessed. So it went something like this. She had one of her patients on service was dying of breast cancer and metastatic breast cancer, basically. But this was not an old woman. This was a woman probably in her mid 40s at the time. And she was still doing pretty well. I mean, she had been given a terminal diagnosis because the cancer had spread. They couldn't really do anything. They had tried different treatments. Nothing was working. But she was not super sick yet. She was still living on her own. She was still going out to the store, doing errands that she needed to do. But she was, getting visits from the hospice nurse a couple times a week at this point, maybe 2 times a week. And so one day the nurse showed up, and she had had the same nurse since she'd gone on service with hospice. And this nurse, who's the one that told me the story, she shows up one day, and the woman doesn't seem like herself. Like normally she was a very strong person, and she seemed to be handling her, terminal condition very well. But this one day she was just acting very distracted and just not herself. And so the nurse asked her, "Are you okay? Was there anything you want to talk about?" Which is, that's a wonderful nurse for doing that, by the way. The woman says, "Well, I really don't want to tell you because you're going to think I'm crazy." And the nurse goes, "No, just tell me, what's going on." And so the lady just bluntly asks her, she goes, "Should I be seeing dead people?" And the nurse doesn't laugh. I'm laughing because that's just funny to ask it in that way. But the nurse didn't laugh. And she said, "Well, what's been happening?" And so the patient goes, she says to her, she goes, "Am I closer to death than I thought I was? Like, am I dying in the next week or two?" And the nurse said, "Well, no, based on your clinical condition, no, you're not that close to, the end." And so the woman goes, so she said, "Tell me what's happening, to the patient." And so the patient kind of reluctantly, because I think she thought that her nurse wouldn't believe her, honestly. And she said to her, she said, "Well, in the last several days, I've been seeing like her parents had both already passed away." She said, "I've been seeing my parents and my grandparents and other family members who have died." And so the nurse asked her, she goes, "Well, how does that make you feel?" And she said, "I'm a little freaked out." She goes, she says, "I knew that this kind of thing could happen before you die, but that's why I was thinking, well, maybe I'm closer to death than I thought." But she said, "I don't feel that bad. I don't feel like I'm close to death." And so the nurse goes, "Well," she goes, "Tell me more about how that's affecting you." And so she basically told her that they would just, she'd just be sitting in her living room and they would just pop in and she'd see them. I mean, it wasn't like a sensation. She actually saw them. And they would pop in and then it would just kind of freak her out. And even though they weren't being like, it wasn't a malevolent kind of thing or anything, it was just kind of freaking her out. So the nurse says, "Well, what do you want to happen?" And she said, "Well, I'm happy to see them before I go, but I'd really like to not deal with that for a while." And so the nurse, even though she'd not really heard of this thing happening this early, way ahead of someone dying, she just kind of went with it. And she said, "Well, why don't we both sit here and talk to them and ask them if they would please leave and they would come back when you're closer to death." And the lady, the patient goes, "We can do that?" And she goes, the nurse goes, "Yes, we can certainly ask. I mean, I don't know that it's going to work, but we can ask." So anyway, they did that. They very lovingly, she talked to her family, and the nurse chimed in too, and they both said, please please, wait. Please go away now. I'm not ready for this. And please come back like a couple of weeks before I'm going to die. And so they made that request, and it worked. The woman didn't see them again until a few months later, when it was about 2 weeks before she was going to die, and then they came back and visited her. Now, that's amazing to me. I have never, it was the only story I ever heard like that from a hospice nurse, that the family, I got to think maybe the family just was eager to see her. Maybe they just were really happy that she was going home, I don't know. It's a really interesting, or maybe this woman, I don't know. Maybe your relatives come earlier for a lot of people, but you just don't sense them till towards the end. So it's possible that this patient had more extra sensory abilities to pick up on it. That's possible too. Anyway, it gave her great comfort that they went away, but then they came back. And so I just thought that was a lovely story. And I think to myself, you know what? I'm really looking forward to that someday. I'm really hoping that I have enough warning, ahead of time that I'm, going, that's my time, and that, and then I really do get to see my family, and it gives me comfort, because for most people, it does give them comfort, gives them great amount of comfort. So, let me know if you've ever had like a near-death experience where you've had that, or or of someone that has had that. Of course, you don't share any names or anything, but just share the story. I really wonder if there's that many people that have had that experience where someone like her, your family starts coming to see you like months ahead of time. I think that's probably uncommon, but we'll see. We'll see what you say below. But I just wanted to share that today for my spiritual story. Just so you know, a lot of you do follow my other channel, and I am sitting here filming this while still in Albania in my little hotel room right now. And so I'll be leaving here by the time you see this. I'll be leaving here about a week later. And but I'll continue to put out a video on here every Friday on some sort of spiritual topic. And please, also in the comments below, if there's particular things you would like me to discuss. It doesn't necessarily have to be something I've gone through personally, but anything you want me to discuss on here, please, give suggest it. Doesn't mean I will be able to cover it, but at least I would like the suggestion, and it might be something I'd really like to do. So anyway, until next time, be kind always, and take care of yourselves. Bye.